Good morning. This sermon is pre-recorded for Sunday, the 9th of August, the 11th Sunday after Pentecost. I want to start by telling you the story from our gospel reading. It begins in a place where authoritarian rule is layered. There is the king of the region, a man whose family had once held true power, but who had been crushed by a stronger, larger empire. The man who holds that role now longs for more power, but has no interest in losing any that he has. He likes the luxuries he's able to secure for himself, even while the people go hungry. The emperor sends a governor to ensure that the place is kept in line. They've learned that by allowing for the role of king to continue, it helps people feel like they have more control. It actually keeps them calmer. But it also is a place where dissent can breed. And so a careful balance must be held at all times, so that the people are calm and the empire can reap its rewards. And in this place, a child is born. A child is born whose mother sings to him of the possibility of a world in which the poor are cared for, those who are hurting are healed, and all who come together can have enough. They flee their homeland as part of living under this empire. They've experienced what it's like to be unable to be safe in your own home. And they've settled back in their village. And the young man grows and becomes an adult. And at some point, he goes in search of his cousin, a man named John. John is preaching in the wilderness. He is calling people to repentance. He is talking about that world where all have enough, where the hurting are helped, where love is the rule of law. We don't really know why the man goes. Was he sent by the family to go figure out what's going wrong with the cousin? Was he at some kind of crossroads in his own life? What we know is when he gets there, John greets him with joy, and he is baptized in the River Jordan, and he spends time in the wilderness at prayer, and he collects some of John's disciples who are so taken by whatever is going on with him that they become his disciples instead of John's. And together, this group of men, women, perhaps some children are traveling with them. We don't know. But this group gathers and they begin to travel. They begin to tell people about the possibility of a world where the poor are cared for, where the hungry are fed, where those who are sick are made well, where there is enough to eat for everyone. A world that they claim is the world God always intended. Word begins to get out that this man, this is a story about Jesus, that Jesus is someone who's worth listening to, someone who can do miraculous things. And while Jesus and his friends are traveling, John the Baptist is captured by Herod the king and murdered. John the Baptist had been telling Herod that his way of life wasn't good enough, wasn't the way that God would have wanted him to live. It wasn't the way a righteous king would behave. And Herod looked for a reason and a way to ensure that John would stop making those noises, stop preaching those things, stop calling him to account. Jesus and his disciples might have heard word of what had happened to John, and they continued to teach and to preach. And just before the story that we heard this morning, they've gathered a crowd of 5,000 people and fed them, all of them, demonstrating in real time that a world where everyone has enough is possible. And then Jesus commands the disciples to get into a boat and go to the other side of the Lake of Galilee. I have to tell you, I have heard this preached many times. I've heard it preached probably by preachers like me who are days away from being on vacation, who see ourselves in Jesus, having poured himself out for a crowd, just desperate for a little bit of time to himself, time to go up the mountain and rest and reflect and be with God with no expectations. But the Greek word is that Jesus commands the disciples to go and get into that boat. It's not a suggestion. It's not a, hey, guys, why don't you go ahead and do this? I'm just going to, go over here and have a little break. It's get in the boat and get out of here. And it makes me think perhaps the piece that we don't hear articulated in this story is that what they have done is risky. The empire doesn't want people to know that they could change the world. The empire wants people to know only that their best expectation might be to be, I don't know, enlisted into the army, where perhaps they'd get a decent wage if they're lucky, before they're killed in a battle that has nothing to do with them. So Jesus puts the disciples in a boat and sends them out into the Lake of Galilee, perhaps just so that they are away when Herod's troops or Roman troops show up to find out who is this agitator who's feeding 5,000 people in the wilderness. And Jesus goes up a mountain to pray. He does this a lot. It is partially a pattern of behavior we are meant to emulate. We are supposed to take time to just pause and be with God. It's important. It's important because it helps us hear whether we are doing what God is calling us to do. We can't know that if we aren't willing to take the time to actually be with God, to listen for what God might be saying to us. And it's even more important when the thing we think perhaps we are called to do carries risk. Perhaps Jesus is up that mountain asking God, is this okay? What happens if something happens to these disciples? Am I prepared for that? Are we all prepared for that? Am I prepared for the future that is coming for me? The cross, the resurrection. Jesus comes down from the mountain. He finds that the Sea of Galilee is rough. The Sea of Galilee is apparently often rough. Perhaps those of you who have been to the Holy Land can attest to this, but that's what I understand. There's a particular kind of wind that comes up on that lake that is unique. And so the disciples are in the boat in the early morning hours, that dreaded time when you wake and wish you could go back to sleep, but sometimes can't. And Jesus walks out onto the water to be with the disciples. Of course, the disciples are confused. And if you are a small band of agitators in the midst of a series of authoritarian layers of government, you want to be real sure that the people coming to join your little band, particularly when they're doing slightly wild things like walking on water, are in fact the people you are looking for. So when Peter wants to make sure that Jesus is who he says he is, he asks Jesus to let him join in the kind of miraculous activity that Jesus is up to. I'm going to think about that for just a second. The way that Peter feels like he will know if it is Jesus or not is if Jesus will share the miraculous power of being able to walk on water. The sign that it is Jesus is that Jesus is willing to share his power. Peter gets out to Jesus, but then sort of freaks out and realizes what he's doing and needs a bit of help. And there is this lovely line in the gospel where Jesus says, "O ye of little faith, why didn't you doubt?" And many of us have heard that said to us in one way or another. Maybe never explicitly, maybe we've just taken that phrase and taken it home and wondered whether we have enough faith, whether Jesus would be saying to us, "O ye of little faith." But what if the thing that we hear as this great rebuke? I mean, it's a problem Peter has a couple of times. It's understandable. We think this is a rebuke. But what if in this moment it's not yet? What if Jesus isn't mad at Peter? What if he is just reminding Peter that he's not supposed to do this thing alone? What if it's just a notice, the same kind of noting that we say to our children when they need a bit of help, when we see them struggling? What if that's all Jesus is saying? "Oh, Peter, you're struggling. Let me help you." Would that change the nature of this story? I wonder how this story helps us live in this moment. A moment when authoritarian government seems particularly strong. A moment when the things that batter us in our little boats on seas feel powerful. When it often feels like there is not enough for everyone, but we are called to try to hold on to a belief that there is, in fact, enough for all of us, that God creates a world in which the hungry may be fed and the thirsty may be given something to drink and the unwell may be made whole. In the midst of all of that work, I wonder what it would be like to hear Jesus saying, "Take my hand, I'll hold you up while you do this thing." To hear Jesus say, "Let me share what I am good at with you so that you can be good at it too." I wonder how it might change us this week if we believed that we could walk on water as long as we hold on to Jesus.